1700s, Vermont. When out and about in the woods, there are all sorts of creatures you might encounter during your ventures. However, seeing a bear is rare, but still very much a possibility. However, as always, many bears are more afraid of you than you are of it. But what about a highly intelligent bear? A bear that isn't afraid of humans? What about a bear that terrorized both Native Americans and settlers of the northern Vermont area for decades? What about a bear so infamous the governor even went to extraordinary lengths to try and hunt it? What about a bear with the ability to also disappear in a flash and even walk on two legs? What is the story behind this clever bear? Is there any truth to this folktale legend of a bear that seems to defy the laws of conventional nature? Today on Unblurring the Unknown, venture into the outdoors with me, and let me tell you a story about Slipperskin the bear. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. As always, I am your host, Dominic, and today's episode is one that I have actually done some previous research into before this episode, and the second I kind of looked into this, it piqued my interest ever since, and I've kind of had it on the back burner and on my episode queue, so I felt like this week was a good time to do an episode on it. Now, obviously, with any New England-based legend and folklore, that kind of always gets me hooked. And this story in particular sounds very bizarre and very odd. Now, of course, we start with an animal probably everybody has seen before in a bear. Right? On the surface, nothing seems special about a bear. Everybody's seen a bear. They all know what a bear is. You know, they dig into your bird feeders, your trash cans. Maybe sometimes they wander across your yard. Fairly harmless, unless you find a mama bear with cubs. However, this story, in this bear, is a little different than that. Now, how today's episode is going to work is that I'm going to dive into the legend and folklore of Slipperskin, some encounters and sightings that people have had of him back in the late 1700s and 1800s, and then wrap it all up at the end with my own personal thoughts, as well as some theories on whether or not this Slipperskin creature is a bear, or perhaps something else entirely. Now, the legend of Slipperskin seems to date from what I can find to the late 1700s to early 1800s. The description of Slipperskin seems very consistent with that many settlers and Native Americans describe pretty much like your normal black bear, which are not uncommon to the woods of northern Vermont. However, what seems to set it apart is its seemingly unnatural level of intelligence, with some witnesses saying they saw the bear walking on its hind legs and never on fours, and also the bear's consistent ability to avoid capture and death, thus earning the name Weejuk, or wet skin, from the Native Americans in the area. Whereas the white settlers in the area took to calling it Old Slippery Skin, and both of these names were referencing the same idea that this bear was so intelligent and so fast and so quick that he couldn't be caught. Now, the story of Slipperskin seems to be told throughout various parts of Vermont, where it seems like various different types of behavior is described from this bear pretty much performing. Now, the first written record of Slipperskin would come from a man known only as Duluth when he was a member of Rogers Raiders, which, if you don't know what Rogers Rangers is, that was an independent ranger company that helped the British during the 7 Years' War. The more you know. Now, Duluth would mention Slipperskin in 1759 as he then passed through the unsettled area of Vermont after a raid in Odanak near Montreal, Quebec, Canada. Obviously, his battalion went up to Odanak for that raid. They were coming back through unsettled portions of Vermont, and this is where Duluth would first mention Slipperskin in his journal. As Duluth and his ranger squad mates moved through the area past Memphremagog Bay, he wrote the following in his journal, referring to the scouts of his ranger party, and I quote, "Were ever being annoyed, for not reason, by a large black bear, who would large pine cones and nuts down upon us from trees and ledges, the Indians being also disgusted, and know him, and call him Weejuk, or wet skin." Close quote. Now, like I said, this would be the first mention of Slipperskin, but it most certainly would not be the last. However, before the first time Duluth mentioned Slipperskin in his notes, this might not have been the first time that Slipperskin was seen, or perhaps some sort of iteration of him. Perhaps Slipperskin is actually from a long line of mischievous bears that date back to the 1600s, because infamous explorer Samuel de Champlain, for which Lake Champlain in Vermont is named after, was rumored to have witnessed a black bear throwing pine cones at him and his crew while they were spending time around Missisquoi Bay, Quebec. Now, obviously, we don't know if the stories from Samuel de Champlain and then this Duluth person from the Rogers Raiders, if they are related, or even if the bears are related. There's a big gap in years. However, I wanted to mention that before we get further into the story. Again, how a bear could be throwing objects without opposable thumbs is another one of those things that we will get into a little bit later, but I wanted to mention that as well, and we will circle back on that in the very end. Now, it is unsure where Slipperskin would go after the initial reports by Rogers Rangers, but pretty much a lot of towns in northern Vermont reported on him through the town's local gazettes and newspapers. In the town of Leamington, Vermont, Slipperskin was reportedly a very aggressive and mean bear, with him ripping up gardens, tearing fences out of the ground, frightening and scaring off cows and sheep, and trampling through farmers' corn harvests. It's clear that he hated humans and was kind of an asshole. And this behavior seems very odd for a bear. Now, as I mentioned in the open, it's not uncommon for a bear to get into your trash or bird feed or anything like that, but this is kind of another level of intelligence that he's seemingly able to display. Now, he also supposedly threw rocks at farm equipment that was left in the fields, which is also extremely impressive because, like I mentioned, bears don't have opposable thumbs. So how this bear was able to pick up rocks and throw it at farm equipment, I have no idea. And that just totally remains a mystery. Now, people who saw Slipperskin in Leamington said that he did not run on all fours like the other bears in the area, but rather just on his hind legs, which is also very strange. Even though bears can move and walk on their hind legs, they don't use that as a primary form of movement, as that's not really all that natural for them to move around like that for extended durations of time. Now, townspeople started to get angered by the constant harassment from this bear, and they sent out hunters to try and hunt down Slipperskin. However, they had no luck. One hunter reportedly had his sights set on Slipperskin, and before he could even get a shot off, it was like the bear disappeared completely and was nowhere to be found. The legends from Leamington even went on to say that Slipperskin's tracks that he left behind were, quote-unquote, as big as wagon wheels, and that he was powerful enough to squeeze sap out of maple trees if he felt like it. Now, if this is in fact true, this would be a bear of astronomically large proportions. Now, in Morgan, Vermont, a story about Slipperskin emerged from a group of hunters who were ascending Elon Mountain up an old logging road. While hiking up this logging road, they heard a loud thumping noise coming from in front of them, and Slipperskin emerged from the forest and onto the road. The hunters, thinking that perhaps they could surprise the bear and kill it, jumped into nearby bushes to try and hide. However, Slipperskin had a better idea. As the story goes, Slipperskin ripped a massive stump out of the ground and hurled it down the logging trail at the hunters. Now, luckily, none of them were hurt. However, the hunters took this as a sign that perhaps the bear was a lot smarter than they thought, and took the bear's warning and decided to leave the mountain. Now, in Westmore, Vermont, another story of Slipperskin would be reported. In the months prior to this sighting, rumors spread throughout that town that the bear was nearby and stirring up all sorts of traditional trouble, like trampling farm fields and, tearing up people's fences, the normal behavior that has come to be expected from Slipperskin. Now, in Westmore, a group of German clergymen decided one day that it would be a good day to go outside and have a picnic of sorts alongside the shores of the nearby Lake Willoughby. While out on this picnic is when they would have their encounter with Slipperskin. Now, Slipperskin would see the group of clergymen and make way for them. Now, knowing the danger that they were in, the clergymen fled for their lives. Now, this story sometimes includes the mentioning of one of these clergymen being eaten alive by Slipperskin, and that would actually turn out to be false. When the clergymen were waiting after some time to return to their campsite, and Slipperskin would eventually wander off back into the woods, they noticed one of the men was missing. Now, in the mess of torn blankets, personal belongings, and food scraps, that kind of gave them the impression that they were looking upon the half-eaten corpse of their fellow scholar, However, this was not the case, and the clergyman was later found safe and unharmed. Now, it is unsure whether or not Slipperskin killed anybody during his, reign of terror, if that's what you want to call it. However, he didn't seem as aggressive as he seemed towards humans. He didn't seem like he wanted to kill humans, which again seems very odd and kind of, again, displays a higher level of intelligence that we'll talk about a little bit later, but it just kind of makes you wonder for the time being. However, we are not done yet with the list of towns that seem to have issues with this mischievous bear. In the town of Victory, Vermont, townspeople told a similar story of this mischievous bear who would harass the townspeople. He would trample crops, of course. He would drag whole trees through farmers' fields, and he would even throw rocks at school children as they were leaving school. Now, I don't mean to get off topic, but this bear had some serious beef with the kids or something like that, because a bear throwing rocks at school children is ridiculous when you say it out loud, but it's also kind of pretty funny if you think about a bear just picking up a rock and just being like, yeah, take this, I'm going to throw rocks at you. It's kind of funny. Now, townspeople of Victory would also try and hunt the bear down with no success. Now, an early account from a hunter in Victory, from the Vermonter, tells this quote about Slipperskin. The bear would right back in the tracks of his forward movement, with such accuracy and precision that no one who did not suspect the trick would see any signs of a reverse movement, until the bear came to some large rock or knoll, and then gave a long leap onto a bare spot, and move off in a direction diverging from that just pursued. So, obviously, if you don't fully understand what that is, because that's a little bit like broken English a little bit, it means the bear was intelligent enough, if he was being tracked, he could back out of his tracks to almost leave his tracks ending in one spot, so he couldn't be tracked. This indicates that there is some sort of higher intelligence at play here. It is no secret that bears are very smart and intelligent animals, but this seems so smart and so out of character for your traditional black bear. Lastly, in Maidstone, Vermont, was another hotbed of Slipperskin sightings and encounters. Now, during these rash of sightings, the governor at the time, Jonas Galusha, set it upon himself to try and lure and capture the bear once and for all, in kind of some type of bragging right, because he wanted to be the one, hey, look, I caught Slipperskin, the reign of terror is over. But he also wanted to do it because his re-election bid was rapidly approaching, and he kind of put a big part of his re-election campaign in northern Vermont by saying, hey, I am going to capture the bear that is terrorizing you. That is why you should vote for me, because I'm going to be the one to finally capture the bear. Now, in 1813, Governor Galusha and his hunting party would venture into the woods around Maidstone to try and lure Slipperskin out from wherever he was hiding, and he had a clever plan to do so. Now, Governor Galusha thought that the best way possible to attract Slipperskin was by using himself as bait. Now, he took out some female bear-scented ointment and rubbed it all over himself to try and lure Slipperskin out. Now, shortly after doing this, and as the story goes, Governor Galusha and the hunting party moved through the dense woods. Slipperskin would appear. Now, members of the hunting party would describe Slipperskin as a formidable sight with a quote-unquote eerie intelligence shining in its eyes. Once Slipperskin caught sight of Governor Galusha, the chase was on, and the bear started running after the governor. The governor then tried to lure the bear from the deep woods out of it and towards another hunting party down towards the way. The governor was quoted as saying, as he was being chased by Slipperskin, "Out of my way, boys, I'm bringing him back alive." And that is an actual quote he said as he's being chased by this giant bear. However, when Governor Galusha made it to the second hunting party, that hunting party was completely caught off guard, and they scrambled. The men frantically tried to get their rifles ready and take aim at the bear. However, the agility of Slipperskin and the speed and ease in which he darted through the trees made it extremely difficult for any of the hunters to even get a shot off. Eventually, the governor's pursuit to capture the bear did not work. Before Governor Galusha could realize he wasn't being chased anymore, Slipperskin had vanished back into the forest. Presumably, Slipperskin knew the ruse was up and what was being set up for him by the men. Funniest enough out of this whole story, the governor did not win re-election that year. Perhaps maybe there was a relation between the governor not being able to capture Slipperskin after all and him not being re-elected. But who knows? The stories of Slipperskin are those that really make you wonder if, in fact, this was a bear of great size and intelligence that roamed the woods of northern Vermont, and to be honest, this kind of got me thinking. Was this truly a bear at all? Could something else be at work here? I won't get super deep into this, as I will kind of recap it all and go into theories a little bit later, but it's something to think about for the time being. And reading these stories and accounts also got me curious about the true size of Slipperskin. Although we don't get any height or weight descriptions from what I could find, everyone said that this was a bear of massive proportions. So I know from basic knowledge that the only bear native to the northeast United States is the black bear, and that is the smallest of the 3 species that inhabit North America. So that leaves us with only one option for the type of bear it is anyway. And for this bear to be the size described by witnesses and what was reported, this possibly would be the largest black bear to have ever existed. Now, the largest black bear that ever existed, or at least what I could find on the internet, because it seems like there is conflicting accounts on the true kind of record for the largest black bear, what I could find and what I think is the right one, feel free to correct me in the comments if this is not correct, but from what I could find, this seemed to be the largest one. The largest black bear killed was in Canada in 1972, which, when field dressed, weighed out to a whopping 902 pounds, which means this bear probably tilted the scales at 1,000+ pounds before being field dressed. Now, in my opinion, this would be a bear that would probably more than likely fit the bill. However, we get accounts from people who say Slipperskin, of course, left footprints the size of wagon wheels, which could imply again, perhaps this bear was even larger than 1,000 pounds, and 1,000 pounds is a big animal. So I took to the internet to try and find out what was the largest bear species to ever exist, and it actually led me down a rabbit hole to another bear cryptid that existed in Russia. Even though we're talking about 2 different species of bear, I think this story is very interesting, and perhaps it could provide us some context about Slipperskin. Now, this portion of the episode, and going into this rabbit hole about this other bear cryptid in Russia, starts with a guy named Sten Bergman. Now, Mr. Bergman was an adventurer and zoologist from Sweden, and Bergman had traveled all throughout the world in the early 1900s, but I'm not here to talk about his accomplishments, but rather the bear that is named after him, Bergman's bear. During Sten Bergman's travels, he eventually ended up in the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia. Now, if you do not know where that is the little kind of tip that sticks down out from Siberia. If you're kind of looking at a map, it's kind of high up there. Again, kind of sticks out from Siberia. It's that little peninsula. It's kind of like above, like, the Koreas. It's like that other peninsula that kind of hangs down. If you looked at it on a map, you'd be like, oh, so that's what that area is called. I hope that kind of explains where I'm talking about. Now, during this time, the Kamchatka Peninsula was closed off from the public by the Soviets during the Cold War. And this is actually the same area where the Bering Land Bridge forms during the wintertime that connects Russia to Alaska. So I'm assuming, obviously, the Soviets closed off that because it's proximity to America. However, Sten Bergman was able to get into this area, and during his tenure in this area, he was given a pelt from one of the native tribes in the area. He was given a pelt that was said to be from one of the native Kamchatka brown bears to the area. However, this pelt, that was supposedly from a Kamchatka brown bear, was much larger. Exponentially larger. The Kamchatka brown bear is already one of the largest subspecies of brown bear in the world. However, this pelt that Bergman was given dwarfed that. The hide was distinctively different, with the hair not being brown, but being black, and it had feet that measured 14.5 by 10 inches, which is very, very large. You can kind of figure that out in, basic math. That's the size of a large dinner plate that he's leaving by as footprints. That is gigantic. Now, Bergman theorized that perhaps this was a subspecies of bear that was either extinct or somehow still living in scattered populations in the area. Now, the native people of that area do have a name for this type of bear, or at least they did during this time period. They called it, and I apologize if I butcher this, they called it Urkuium, which loosely translates to trousers pulled down, because of the way the bear walks, looking like someone walking with their pants pulled down. which is kind of funny. And I get a little chuckle out of that the local people were like, oh, the bear looks like he walks with his pants pulled down, so that's what we're going to call him. Which, again, that's kind of humorous. But the natives also called it God Bear, which is exponentially more scary than the first name regarding with the bear with pants walking around his ankles. So that God Bear is a heck of a lot more scary. Now, some scientists and investigators theorize that perhaps what Bergman was looking at was the pelt of a giant short-faced bear, which at the time it existed could weigh as much as 2,200 pounds. However, the giant short-faced bear is an extinct species of bear that supposedly died out over 12,000 years ago. However, could it be possible that a small group of these bears were able to survive past the theorized extinction date and maybe mated with some of the native brown bears of the region to create some type of hybrid? It's interesting to think about. Now, the giant short-faced bear's range did extend into the United States and into parts of the Midwest and even modern-day Pennsylvania. Is it possible that a bear like this one migrated to the northeastern United States and mated with the local black bears to create some type of subspecies of bear that could grow to enormous sizes? It might be a little far-fetched, but it's certainly something to think about. But with that all being said, let's kind of recap, and let's perhaps dive into some theories about what could be at play with the legend of Slipperskin and whether or not he even existed in the first place. Now, our first theory is that this is real, and that this is pretty much that these stories were shared around Vermont during the 1700s and early 1800s were real, and that they actually happened, and that there just happened to be a very large and intelligent black bear that wandered the forests of the area, and it just so happens that this was a 1 in a million bear in terms of size and intelligence. Pretty cut and dry here in terms of theories. However, I'm not sure if I fully want to buy into the theory that it's just like your regular run-of-the-mill bear, because not only is that not fun, I just don't think that this is the case. Now, our second theory is one I just mentioned, and that being that this is some sort of prehistoric holdout crossbreed. Now, I like to think that some sort of prehistoric holdout that crossbred with the traditional black bear, and that maybe that could exist, and maybe like a subspecies could exist, and kind of what we're left with through that crossbreeding are these kind of descendants of short-faced bears and kind of the old black bears, and we're left with this kind of larger than average and possibly more intelligent hybrid bear. Now again, this theory might be a little bit far-fetched. And, of course, this wouldn't explain the bear's ability to pick things up and throw them, as you need opposable thumbs to do that. And it's not like the short-faced bear had opposable thumbs either. So that wouldn't make sense, but I guess that doesn't make sense with any description or any bear to begin with. However, I think maybe over time, the genes from the short-faced bear, maybe they slowly worked their way out as the generations of black bears continued to breed in the area with what we have now in modern times. Again, maybe this whole theory is a bit far-fetched, and maybe the idea of a giant prehistoric bear mating with the old bears of the region, and then eventually the genes just kept on kind of working their way out of the system as you have generation of these bears, and eventually you don't even have any genes of this old bear left because you have 400 generations of intelligent, smart bears. Now, again, like I said, probably a little bit far-fetched, but it's definitely the fun theory out of the ones I have. Now, our last theory is, or second to last theory, is maybe this is not a bear at all. Now, some people also theorize that maybe Slipperskin wasn't a bear, but rather something closer in resemblance to Bigfoot. Now, of course, I feel like everybody knows what Bigfoot is, so I'm not even going to go into depth on what Bigfoot is. And this is a popular theory that this is not a bear, but this is Bigfoot. However, there isn't much evidence in my eyes to support this, because Native American peoples throughout the United States all had their stories of Bigfoot, or at least a creature that was very similar to Bigfoot, and the Northeast is no exception to these legends. Now, you would think that if this story started originally with the Native American people, and even the settlers, you would think that they would know the difference between a bear, a commonly seen animal in the area, and something more unnatural like Bigfoot, or something completely different. So that, to me, doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but with the report of Slipperskin standing on its back legs for an extended period of time, I can kind of understand why it would be quick to jump to that conclusion for some people. Now, our last theory is that this is a folktale. This theory is pretty much that the story is fake, but not in the traditional way. Perhaps there was a case of a rather mischievous bear that was smart and quite large and avoided detection from townspeople. And once this story spread, the legend and folktale grew from small stuff to perhaps a story to explain things they couldn't quite understand. Like, oh, a tree fell in my field. Oh, it must have been Slipperskin. Or, look, a bear trampled through my crops. Oh, it must be Slipperskin. You can kind of see where I'm going with this. Perhaps these stories are true to a fault. Now, it would make sense for any bear to be kind of confused as Slipperskin because it seemed like there was no other defining characteristics between Slipperskin and kind of your regular bear besides him just being large. So maybe kind of any mischievous bear behavior or bear in general got misidentified as Slipperskin, and that maybe helped spread the legend even more. However, let's kind of dive into my personal thoughts here. I think in terms of theories, and what I want to go with is that I think it's a combination of it being a folklore legend, but also being a real animal. Now, in the untamed forests of that time period, it would make sense that bears could grow to a much larger size than they currently can, just because of how much land area they had at that time. It would make sense that a bear could be very big during those time periods. However, I think maybe the intelligent factor got spread around after he kind of did something kind of smart, and then people started saying he was ultra smart, and that just kind of added to the legend, and it kind of just played the game of telephone, right? One person says something, and then the next person says something, but it's a little bit more exaggerated, and so on and so forth. Now, as much on the flip side as I would like to believe that this is maybe an iteration of a Bigfoot legend, I think too many things separated apart from that and kind of make it truly unique. I think there is a true story here in terms of Slipperskin. However, I think the story has been twisted a little bit to make it a little bit more of a legend and folktale, one you tell around the campfire. However, that is just my opinion. Of course, feel free to let me know all of your thoughts in the comments. But I thoroughly believe that this is a real animal. I think Slipperskin did exist, or at least some version of him, a very large black bear. However, the legend kind of spread through people, again, playing that game of telephone where things greatly got exaggerated, like, oh, the bear threw a stump at me and it was huge and he can squeeze the sap out of maple trees. I don't think anything can squeeze sap out of maple trees, but that's just my personal opinion. So that is one of those things where I think is greatly exaggerated for the story to kind of create that kind of, again, that folktale type of aspect to it. However, what made this really fun to research and look into is that this kind of seems like a one-off. I've never heard of another legend that is like this one, of a giant bear or anything like that, and I think that it kind of truly separates it from all the other folktales and, legends of the United States and kind of these creepy critters and, campfire tales that you kind of hear. And it kind of truly makes you think twice about that bear you might see rummaging through your trash or getting into your bird feeder at the end of the night. However, that is going to do it for this week's episode over Slipperskin. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, back into the realm of kind of cryptid, folklore, legend. And this was a very fun one for me, of course. This is kind of in my backyard in terms of this legend. So I thoroughly enjoyed learning a little bit more about the area where I currently live. So that was fun and exciting. However, with that being said, that is going to do it for this week's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I greatly appreciate the support. If you were listening to on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps me out greatly. If you were listening to this on Spotify, please turn on post notifications so you get notified every time I post a new episode. If you, in case missed it, I dropped an update episode just the other day about my Connecticut River Valley Killer episode I released all the way back in Season 1 with kind of some developing updates that I discovered over the past week. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that and you have listened to the original Connecticut River Valley Killer episode, please go check that out. Kind of some intriguing updates there for you. But as well, if you were not aware, you can also send me topic suggestions, and you can send those to my email or through direct messaging. You can send those to me, unblurringtheunknown on Instagram, also unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. You can send those topic suggestions to me. I try and be really good about them. They kind of go in the episode queue, and it's something I try and get to, like I said, as quick as I possibly can. But with that being said, of course, that is going to conclude this week's episode. Again, as always, appreciate the support. and I will see you all on the next one.